Hello, everyone. We are live. Welcome. This is Cliff's Dark Gems. And today we have a very special guest who I'm going to introduce quickly, and that is Matt from Bask in the Story. Now, Matt has an awesome channel. He's got a very eclectic, wide variety of books that he reads, including non-fiction, fantasy, science fiction, and other things. And recently he has delved into a little bit of horror, which I'm very pleased about, and we're going to talk about that. So yeah, Matt, how you doing, my friend?
I'm very well, Cliff. Thank you very much. Thank you for having me on. It's a
Yeah,
delight to see you in person.
yeah, it's an absolute pleasure, man. I'm glad you're smiling after last night. I know it was tough, but hey, these things happen, eh?
Yeah, absolutely. Always happen. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. But anyway, tell me a little bit about your background into booktube, into reading. What got you into reading?
I mean, what got me to reading? So, I think like some of my earliest sort of core childhood memories are sort of parents reading to me, and that sort of led me into reading. And I've always had sort of a desire for sort of fantasy, sci-fi has always been sort of
Yeah,
the the books I tend to gravitate towards.
yeah,
And we've got, and that probably goes back to, again, so my childhood. Like, I always remember my dad reading The Hobbit to me when I was quite young, and that's always sort of stuck with me and sort of led me off on that route. And
yeah,
sort of through life, I think, like many of us, sort of, I've been periods where I've read a lot and periods where I've hardly read anything, and sort of in and out with things happening in life and sort of reading going to a back burner. So like I read a fair bit during like my school years, and at university I didn't really read much other than what I needed to uh, for my university course. And
yeah.
then
I
sort
was,
of
yeah, I was
go
actually
on.
the same there. I was the same there. At university, suddenly everything you've been reading up to then, and then suddenly you have to kind of change tact a little bit because you have to start reading what's given to you. Right? Yeah.
Yeah,
Carry on.
yeah. I mean, you did an English based.
Major, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
My
So I did a
majors were
science based.
yeah. My
So I did a science
majors
based
were
degree.
English. Sorry, my majors were English and psychology. So you
Yeah,
were
yeah.
science based.
Yeah, so I did science degree. So mine was a lot more sort of, there was a fair bit of technical reading, but it was a lot more sort of project
Yeah,
based. And it was also like university was much more the social life and like going out late at night, and then coming back in the early hours of the morning didn't necessarily sort of get towards a great reading time in that sense. So yeah, so
yeah,
that sort of fell by the wayside. And then I sort of got back into reading as I went back into work. And I sort of continued reading sort of on and off. I've probably read more in the last couple of years than I would do usually, and I think BookTube has
yeah,
certainly driven part of that, the sort of desire to read, because you're not only are you putting out content, but you're talking with other content creators about books. You get excited about books. You want to read more and more and
yeah,
more. And so I've had the channel now for almost a year. I think it'll be a year next month.
yeah.
Um, and it's been great fun. So I sort of started it a year ago. So I've been a full-time dad for a year and a half, and I wanted something sort of a little project on the side for myself, which is why I started the BookTube channel, just to talk about books because it's something I'm passionate about. And now I've actually gone back to full-time work,
Yeah.
actually in the publishing field, which is quite exciting.
Oh, it's
Uh,
fantastic.
yeah. So
Yeah,
that's seeing it from a different side, from rather than just a fan viewpoint, from a business viewpoint, which has been quite interesting. And sort of just continuing up with the channel and just the joy of sort of sharing a passion for books. But yeah,
yeah,
and I do read fairly eclectically. So fantasy sci-fi, as you say, is probably the it may not even be the majority of my work, my reading, but it's sort of probably about half, maybe just under half of what I read. And then I'll read most other genres. So I'm sort of trying to read a few more classics and get into classics, but contemporary works as well, whatever that genre means, but generally classed as contemporary works, uh, crime thriller, and I have just started stepping into the horror genre
oh
as
yes,
well.
thank you. Welcome to the dark side.
It's
Can I,
bound to happen one day.
yeah, can I stop you just for a second? One thing
Mhm.
we are going to do quite regularly is look at the comments.
Yeah, of
So we've
course.
got a couple of people that have joined us. We've got Gareth from Book Songs and Other Magic. Hang on, let me just put
Oh,
that
hello,
show.
Gareth.
Yeah, and he says, "Hi guys, great to see you, Matt, and great meeting you in London." Yeah, I saw that picture of you next to Gareth.
Yeah.
It was awesome. I'd love to do that, but I'm down here in the little southern tip of Africa. It's not going to happen. That's a pity.
Well, if you ever fancy coming up to what is presently colder and wetter climes,
Yeah.
you're more than welcome. And yeah, no, it's great. We had a big old, I think it was about 20 of us, sort of
Yeah.
booktubers all met up in London. Was it last weekend or the weekend before?
Yeah,
Hi,
I
Kat.
saw a big get together. Yeah,
Yeah, it was really good fun.
Yeah, I actually lived in England for 2 years when I was a kid,
Okay.
and then I actually moved to London after I finished studying. It's kind of a 1 year break before I do anything with my life, with my then girlfriend. And so yeah, we lived in London, and I actually did a door-to-door sales thing. So I got to know
Okay.
London quite well, and I got to know kind of the seedier side of London as well. And sometimes, you bang on the door to try and sell something, and they slam the door in your face and tell you to F off. And yeah, so
Yeah.
it was interesting. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the experience. But yeah, I'd like to be back there someday. It would be cool. And then
Yeah.
you've got
Yeah.
Alicia.
I mean,
Okay, I've got to
hello,
do
Alicia.
something. I've got to do something for Alicia here. I do this every video. Yo, yo, yo. He just likes that. I don't know. And then this is my wife, everyone. And now they talk to each other. Hang on. Yo, Alicia. Okay, so let's get back to the topic quickly. So I know that what we talked about when we planned this video, and I'm quite excited because I must tell you, I've done quite a bit of research. I've actually looked into the history of horror. Where does horror as a genre originate? How far does it go back? And I think that's going to be a very interesting topic of conversation. And I hope everyone joins in with that as well, because I actually now, after doing a bit of research, I'm actually quite interested in reading some early horror, classic horror, dating long before the classics. But before we go there, that's just to whet the appetite. Tell me about the horror that you've been getting into lately.
Okay, so I did just have a look at my shelves to figure out what I've read that actually classes as horror. So obviously I've read a couple of Stephen King. So Pet Sematary was the first one I read of his.
I saw the video.
And I've just finished. Well, I finished a little while ago. Misery. So someone mentioned that one. So I've thoroughly enjoyed both of these. They were flipping excellent. But also I've read.
Yeah. Which one did you prefer? Can you give me just a brief?
Yeah.
Look at one and the other, and just tell me what you thought.
So Misery is my preferred. My preference. So Pet Sematary I really enjoyed. I think everyone says this about Stephen King's work is his character work is just superb, and you really connect with the character and the story. So like, also I did a video on this already, Pet Sematary, a sort of vlog video where I was reading it and sort of how I felt sort of connected to Lewis in the book, the dad of the story, and sort of seeing connections and connecting with him and some of the fears he has, and having a young child myself, I can certainly connect to, and are some of the fears that I can have felt in the past. So
yeah,
that was a great introduction.
I heard you talking about that in terms of being a father. Hi, Crystal. and how absolutely devastating it must be for a father. Okay, so carry on with the other one.
So yeah, but the reason I prefer Misery, and the reason I think this one is my favorite of the two, is one, the characters in this are just mind-blowingly good. Obviously Annie and Paul are just remarkable, and that the imbalance in the relationship between the two, where Annie holds all the power and is absolutely terrifying, and yet she also has this twist. Oh, she's amazing. She has this twist where she can be there's a sort of a caring element as well, but then she turns and it's just superb. And then Paul's vulnerability at the same time, that mix is just so good. And I think my preference for this comes down to my sort of, I think I have a preference for sort of less sort of supernatural, paranormal activity and more just the horror
Human.
of people.
Yeah, and he writes plenty of that. You have seen the movie, haven't you? With
Yes,
Kathy.
yeah. I
Yeah,
watched
yeah.
it immediately after. It's the second time immediately after I finished the book. So I was like, I need to watch Kathy Bates again because she was superb.
She was terrifying. Yeah, and that's the thing about Stephen King. He writes both so well. You know, the human horror.
Yeah.
I think you might enjoy something like maybe Cujo, Needful
Okay.
Things. Needful Things. That's a bigger scope. It's a small town. It's a little. I know there is a little bit of a supernatural thing going on there. I'm trying to remember, but some people must actually give me some, give us some kind of
Yeah.
suggestions and comments. In fact, actually, I really want to ask everyone that's watching, please give some comments, give some questions, give some suggestions about human monsters that he would find. You know, books with human monsters. Gerald's Game is very interesting.
Okay.
It's basically the thing about Misery I like as well is that it focuses in on a setting, right?
Yeah.
So you got this house, and you got this room, and you got this psychotic nurse and this patient, right? The biggest fan of this patient. Whereas a lot of other Stephen King's works are much more, bigger in scope, bigger in setting. So what he manages to do, just in such a small setting, just with character work, just with such interesting, powerful characters, I find that very interesting. And he's done a number of different books like that. I'm actually going to have a look at here what people say. Okay, I also prefer human horrible people over the supernatural.
Yeah, I
Uh,
agree, Alicia.
Human
Yep.
monsters are terrifying. Have you actually read any? Have you read Silence of the Lambs?
No, no.
Okay, if you want psychotic serial killers, human monsters, do yourself a favor, read that book. Okay,
Okay.
I've got a bit of a thing about serial killers. I know that Stephen King has written a lot of books about, kind of human monsters, but there we go, Matt, you will have my wife to the rescue here. You will enjoy The Long Walk. And
Okay.
yeah, I agree with that. Um, and Gary says to me, it's not about whether it's supernatural, it's just a great writer. 100% agree. I don't have a preference. I mean, my favorite by him is actually The Stand,
Okay.
which is supernatural, but it's also it's post-apocalyptic, but it's filled with incredible characters, just incredible character work, unforgettable characters. So, as Gareth says, he's just an incredible storyteller. And I think you can't really go wrong with him. But yeah, if you prefer that element, there are books that you could like go into The Long Walk, maybe Needful Things, maybe I heard Under the Dome. That's one I haven't read by him yet, Under the Dome, but that's a
Okay.
big monster. That's a big monster. uh, and I love
So,
all of it from Stephen King. Uh, I love his crime books too. Yeah, we're busy
is
reading.
that is that the Mr. Mercedes? Is that his?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
So I've got. I think I've got Mr. Mercedes. I'm just looking at my shelves over there. I think I've got Mr. Mercedes on my shelf, so I might well get to that at some point, Gareth.
yeah. Because we've actually been reading those as a group
Okay.
for Holly, because the novel Holly, with the
Yeah.
character Holly, she's appeared in a lot of other Stephen King works, including
Okay.
The Bill Hodges trilogy, Mr. Mercedes, and she's a very interesting character. I'm starting to love her. And yeah, so he's written a lot of crime, and from what I read of the latest one now, The Outsider, I'm really enjoying it. Um, yeah, it's kind of like a crime thriller with horror elements, but he's just a magical storyteller. He's just a really, really good storyteller. Um, okay, so Gareth, I enjoyed all three. Oh, 11/22/63, but that's not a horror, but that is an exceptional book. One of my favorite.
Yeah.
It's
That's the
actually
one.
my
One of the ones that I've heard a lot of people talking about how good that that book is.
Yeah.
So it's definitely on my list, that one. But yeah, I know it's not horror, but yeah, it does
Yeah.
seem up my alley, that one.
I think you'll love it. I've enjoyed all three. The Colorado Kid, Joyland. Oh, Joyland. Oh, out of all the ones you mentioned right now, but it's not horror. It's a crime, coming of age, murder mystery, set in a fun park, which I love. It's just so nostalgic. This idea of being older and looking back on our youth. It's a beautiful story. So I really love Joyland. Yeah. My favorite book. Yeah. Yeah. It's sci-fi. Yeah, it's a time travel novel. So if you like sci-fi, it's basically about this English teacher who he basically discovers that he can go back in time, and he goes back to the 1950s. And the reason he's going back is to prevent the assassination of JFK. But of course, he goes back and he lives, he's living the decades before, and he falls in love. And I'm not going to tell the story. You have to read this book. It's incredible.
Yeah.
And there are horror moments as well. Some monsters there as well. But yeah, it wouldn't be Stephen King without it, would it? It's a magnificent book there. What do we got here? I've enjoyed all three. Colorado Kid, Joyland. Yeah. Okay, let's go on with the other ones you've got there.
The other ones I've read. So I've read a couple of the classics. So Frankenstein by Mary Shelley, obviously. So I read that one. I enjoyed this a lot. There's sort of again, it goes back to humans being horrible to people who are different. So that was a great one. And Picture of Dorian Gray, Oscar Wilde.
Yeah.
I do love Oscar Wilde's writing. I know this is the only novel he wrote, but I love some of his plays.
I think for some reason that turned me off. Yeah. For some reason, I was supposed to read that. I did read it. But I was studying at a university. I was terrible with that book. It just didn't speak to me at all on any level. But yeah, I can see why people would love it. Yeah. Carry on.
So yeah, it's. I think for me, what I loved about it is the dialogue and the wit of the dialogue and the speed of it. And I think that's why also I love and not horror related at all, but some of his plays, so like The Importance of Being Earnest, just some brilliant dialogue within that as well. But yeah, I do enjoy his works. And then probably the last one, which across over to the sci-fi element, is Richard Matheson's I Am Legend, which I read very, very recently as well.
I read that. Yeah, just brilliant.
Absolutely superb. The ending of this book, I mean, wow, just a magnificent book.
You're going to see that in my top 100. You know that I've started with the top 100.
I did see you just started that. I've not watched the first one, but yeah, I did see a couple of my.
And yeah, you're going to see that in my top 100 soon.
That was superb. Yeah, someone at work was bugging me for weeks, just saying you have to read this, you have to read this, you have to read this, because it's one of the classics I've not read, and I just wow. For such a short little novel, it really just packs a massive punch. It's just superb.
Yeah.
So, and that's probably, I mean, there may be some more, but that's the ones I've most recently read that sort of stick out to me as sort of within the horror genre, and it's been an experiment for me, just sort of stepping into this genre, and where it, I think we'll come on to this as well, but where it falls sort of between fantasy, sci-fi, and horror sort of lumped together, and how they get separated or not, as well, is quite an interesting thought process, really, from a genre point of view.
Yeah, when we actually planned this together, you had a very interesting concept. Tell me about that, because we're going to talk about that.
I had an interesting concept.
You had a very concept. What did you say that we should actually look at in terms of horror?
So what I would look at the horror is really the history of horror, and so I'm doing currently taking part or co-hosting a readathon about ancient Rome and sort of history. So looking at historical books in ancient Rome, literature from ancient Rome, and also modern authors talking about ancient Rome. They're just going to be thinking about the history of horror, and also horror set in historical settings. And does that, how old is horror is one thing, but also we have a lot of horror in the 1800s, and a lot of sort of what I see anyway from a sort of an outsider to horror genre, a lot of horror modern horror books that are historical are set in sort of the 1800s, maybe 1700s at a push, but not much goes behind that, further back in time. I struggle to find horror from the Romans and things like that. But I was really interested about the history of the horror and also the separation of it from, or the maybe not the separation of it, but the difference between horror, fantasy, and sci-fi, and how they all fit on that spectrum of work. But it was really about the history of it, where it came
Fiction.
from.
I suppose that's called
Speculative fiction. Yes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But the history of horror, I did a little bit of diving on the internet, and I found some interesting things that are actually 4 different things in terms of origin. And going back, I mean, if you think about it, it's been going back a long, long time. You think about it in terms of religion. Important thing is in terms of oral tradition as well. For as long as we've been telling stories, as long as mankind has been around, we've been telling stories. For as long as there's been a fear of the dark, a fear of demons, a fear of other, something beyond ourselves. People would be sitting around a campfire, even if the written word hadn't been invented yet, and they would be telling tales of the dark. And one thing that I actually did a video the other day of, well, it's actually my top 100. I talked about the original Grimm's fairy tales, right? The original.
Okay, yeah.
And that was, I think, in the 1700s, or no, maybe 1792. I can't remember where it was. This is a retelling. This is a retelling, so it's modern. But some of those stories are very, very dark. And parents used to tell kids those stories, so almost to scare them, to warn them, to warn them about things that are dangerous. And some of those stories are dark. There's sex, there's violence, all sorts of stuff. And I suppose that's one way you could look at origins, but I've got a whole lot of things here. So what do you think about oral tradition in terms of history and telling stories and, word of mouth and that kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, it is an enormous aspect of what it is to be human, and that the telling of stories is to be human. And I think I think it was, I'm trying to think of the quote now, but there's a quote by Terry Pratchett that says like that is it's that imagination is what makes us human. And I can't
Yeah,
remember, I'm butchering the quote, but it was along those lines. And it's that oral tradition, which pre-writing, you're going back, what writing was, what, 4,000, 3,000 BC, something like that. But we've had oral traditions for long before that, and it's
yeah,
fascinating, as you say, about what the stories that have come down to us through that. And this is one of the bits about the fantasy, horror, speculative fiction genre. You look at like one of the oldest novels that we have that still exists is obviously Gilgamesh, so the Legend of Gilgamesh. I don't know if you've read Gilgamesh or not, but okay. So it's not an easy read by any stretch of imagination. I mean, it is thousands of years old, but within that, so it's about Gilgamesh who's like this Lord King, and he's trying to achieve immortality effectively. And he's on this like adventure quest to achieve immortality, but along the way he meets, and this is something that's in a lot of sort of ancient literature, is monsters of various sorts. So as you say
yeah.
about the other element,
I was actually going to get to that, but you beat me to it.
So,
Yeah.
but you've got this really fascinating sort of monster element where you've got like half man, half beast, and you've got another monster who.
Minotaurs, hydras, all those
Absolutely, there's
creatures.
so
Right?
many.
And in Greek mythology, there's so many. It's
Yeah,
an age of heroes and monsters, isn't it?
yeah,
That's
yeah,
origin of
exactly.
horror.
And Gilgamesh is sort of that classical. I mean, literally the most classical story of heroes and monsters, and got monsters who breathe fire. But it's not. I don't think it'd be classed as a horror story. It's more of a sort of class as a fantasy epic, because the horror element isn't the focus of the story, and I think that's what it comes down to. That it's more about the sort of the adventure, fantastical element of it rather than the horror. And that got me thinking about, well, what is a horror
And I'm going to talk about
Cool.
that as well, because
That's what you might.
yeah. But first, let's just get to what you're saying. I mean, it's actually quite important to think about, not just Roman and Greek mythology. Um, you got Egyptian mythology as well,
Yeah.
where the people had this concept of the other, and the spirit. The spirit world was kind of revered and feared at the same time, and all of that has to have had some kind of impact, as you know, if we think about modern horror, with vampires and werewolves and stuff like that. But when you really come down to it, I actually had a look at the roots of modern horror, actually in the 18th century. So in the it's actually early 18th century, and I only picked on this up. I picked this up in the last minute. I actually missed this, so I can't comment on it. But the first known horror novel, and it was actually when there was a Gothic literature movement in the 18th century. That's when you started having romanticism, kind of Gothic sentiments. And the first novel was called The Castle of Otranto by Horace Walpole in 1765. And that is seen as the first horror novel, with Gothic elements of haunted castle, um, kind of a woman who's being evil man, and yeah, it's all the kind of Gothic elements, dark, depressing, uh, very, very heavy, emotive kind of feeling. I don't really read Gothic a lot, but apparently that was the origin of horror tales,
Okay.
going back to 1762 in that novel. And of course, that kind of gave birth to numerous kind of Gothic novels, including Frankenstein, including Dracula, because the Gothic kind of sentiments or Gothic conventions are also about the supernatural and about creatures and evil. And so if you give rise to my favorite Gothic novel, would be Dracula.
Okay.
So yeah, that's kind of the origin as I see it.
Yeah, and that's interesting because I was, I've been, as you do, go down a bit of a rabbit hole with these things once you start asking questions. And like one of the things that and sort of connected to the sort of the Roman reading I'm doing now, but there was a so Pliny the Younger in about, I don't know, 160 AD, something like that. He wrote it's sort of a document, a story, however we're going to call it, about a haunted house. And it's effectively this. There's this writer, and he's I can't remember what the story's called, but he's writing a story, and then it's nighttime, and a ghost appears in chains in his house, and this is like 2,000 years ago, and the ghost is sort of beckoning him to follow, and Pliny writes it that the writer just sort of told him just to wait a minute while he finished his writing.
That sounds very Shakespearean, like
It does.
kind of Macbeth kind of thing with this ghost thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and
Yeah.
that's the first, and like, so then he sort of follows the ghost out, and so the ghost sort of leads him out into the courtyard, and then just disappears at a certain point, and he sort of marks the ground where it is. 'Cause it's nighttime. The next day, he gets people to dig it up, and there is, a skeleton in chains, etc., etc. So it's sort of that, what happens after death, and having, sort of almost the sort of connection of honoring the dead has always been with us, seemingly for millennia. But it was fascinating to see that there was sort of those horror stories, even in sort of ancient Rome, ancient Greece, that are very familiar to what we would sort of the haunted house
Yeah,
story, very familiar to what we have now.
that's why I say you can't put them aside as not being relevant.
No.
But there's another thing that I actually found out about or thought about in terms of the Spanish Inquisition and religion and spirituality. So now we're going back to like
Burn the witch. Yeah.
13th century, 12th century. Yeah, I'm not sure when it is. The Salem witch trials. You got the book, The Crucible, which I studied and taught actually. Burn the witch, burn the witch. So there was this obsession, religious obsession with witchcraft and evil during that whole time as well. So that's very definitely a kind of an origin of our fascination with horror. But in terms of actually looking at horror literature genre. Um, it goes back to those Gothic traditions in the 18th century, and the first what is recognised as a horror novel was that the House of, what did I call it?
Retrado?
The House of Otranto or something. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. And that was in 1762. So
Okay.
yeah. It's a fascinating subject because now that I've actually delved into it a little bit, I'm quite keen to get my hand on some of these earlier novels. Because the earliest one I think I've got is anything to do with horror at all. And it's in the 17th century. This is obviously a kind of revised thing, and that is Paradise
Okay.
Lost.
Yeah.
You've got the whole good, evil, demons and angels. I actually love this. I love reading this at university more than a lot of other books. It's difficult reading as well. It's tough. It's a poem. It's a poem. But once I got into it and got into the flow of the language, I thought it was beautiful. Really enjoyed it. Yeah.
Yeah, because you got, I suppose a little bit before that would have been what's called Divine Comedy. Is that
The Divine Comedy? Yeah. And Dante's Inferno is similar as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Similar
Okay, should we just check the comments? Let's check the comments quickly. Okay, so we got Matt, you mentioned reading classics, favorites, horror or not?
Okay, favorites. So the ones I've read that are certainly favorites. So and not these are not horror. So don't be disappointed. But one of my absolute favorites that I've read recently was Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. Thoroughly enjoyed that book. It was superb. Just I was surprised at how funny it was and how amusing and witty her writing was. It was just superb. So I'm definitely read more Jane Austen. And then another one is Count of Monte Cristo, which is again just a fabulous adventure revenge story of a man gets his life destroyed at the beginning and his reaping of revenge years later. It's a fat book, and I was a bit concerned about how fat a book it was, especially for a classic. But it just flies by. It was absolutely brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. It's a roller coaster of adventure.
Yeah, then we got Gareth, I Am Legend, love it so much, my all-time second favorite book. Okay, and then Gareth, great month of reading you had, Matt. Cats, many of the Grimm's fairy tales are dark and brutal. So, yeah, you show imagination, not intelligence.
Yes, that's the quote I was flailing around for. Absolutely, thank you, Alicia.
And then I'm fascinated by folklore, getting beyond the fiction and non-fiction related to it. Yeah, and I think with that book that I've got now, Kat, I think next year I should make more of an effort to join your folklore February. Okay, so next year I'll make an effort because this book looks absolutely stunning. And I haven't read much of it yet. I need to dip into it a bit more. It's got such a beautiful cover, fairy tales,
nice.
And it's not actually the Grimm fairy tales. It's retellings by horror and fantasy authors. So they're basically taking some of the fairy tales and giving them a fresh spin, which I think is very cool. So yeah. Okay, let's just see if you've got any other comments. Thanks for answering a question, Matt. There you go. Have I missed a few? Okay, this was earlier on. What do I get your link? Okay. Okay, no, that's it so far. Yeah, so in terms of horror, like what you're going to read, what you think you might be reading in the future, have you got any ideas? Have you got anything lined up?
So I haven't got anything specifically lined up. I will read more King, just because I've really enjoyed the first two, but I do want to branch out. I know he's such a overarching presence within the horror genre, especially recent, last 50 years or whatever. He is a massive presence in that. But I do want to branch out. I want to try, try some more. So I'm very much open to suggestions on that front. I know you've already suggested one to me, which I'll be getting to this year. The Terror.
Oh, The Terror. Yeah. Oh, yes, as part of the 23 Club, hey?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So I've got to get that one to get to. And that's what Misery was from Colin's Corner. He recommended that one for that sort of reading challenge as well. So yeah. So I haven't got any sort of set in mind that these are the ones I definitely want to read, but I just want to explore it more. And I think, from my perspective, because I'm so new to really venturing into sort of specifically horror related, rather than sort of the. I know you had Usman on from Bards and Books recently talking about grim dark and sort of the sort of horror element of fantasy, if that makes sense. But sort of venturing into more pure horror elements. So there's a lot. It's a huge area. It's a bit overwhelming for someone who's just getting started out. But yeah.
Yeah, no, but yeah, you obviously appreciate good character work. And another author that is a big favorite of mine right now is Robert McCammon.
Okay.
Swan Song, although Swan Song is very similar to The Stand, very similar, but the characters are unbelievable. And then there's also Boy's Life, which is not as much horror. It's horror elements, but it's more coming of age masterpiece. It's my 5th favorite novel of all time now. And he actually also writes not just horror. I think he also writes mystery. There's a series of his that I have not started. I can't remember what it's called, but let's actually look into Robert McCammon. I think you will enjoy him. He's a very, very good author. Okay, and then there's these people, the other authors like Dean Koontz and so on. I've enjoyed one or two of these. There's going to be one in my top 100 coming soon, called Watchers, which is actually a very good novel. But yeah, they're better authors than him. I don't know.
But he is. I mean, I've seen a lot. He is seemingly a prolific writer, because I've seen a lot of titles falling under his name. So he writes a lot. But yeah.
Boy's Life is great. Yeah, it is incredible. I think you'll love it, because it's not. It doesn't sort of. I don't really call it horror. It's sort of a coming of age mystery thriller, more coming of age than anything else, with a little bit of horror element in there. It takes you back to when you were a boy. It just takes you back to that time when you're growing up, you're riding your bike, playing on the streets, you've got not a care in the world. You're not worrying about tomorrow, you're just worrying about the moment. Those kind of things. It just really just takes you back and just puts you in that place. So especially if you grew up in a small town or a village or something, like I kind of did. I remember riding my bike and how fun it was, and it's incredible.
Same.
There's a great channel.
Shades of Orange,
Shades of Orange. Yeah, I've actually watched her all the time. She's very good. So I don't know.
Going back to your Sorry, going back to your point about growing up in a small town, but I can certainly see that fitting with me, because I grew up in a very small rural town where you could just disappear for the day as a kid on your bike and then come back in the evening and your parents weren't particularly worried. The world's a bit world's a bit different now, but that was I can certainly see myself connecting with that. And also I just think there is one book that is on my agenda in the horror genre, which I know you've already mentioned, but it falls under the classic as well. Is planning to read Dracula this year as well.
Yeah, no, I think you'd enjoy that. It's written. It's not everyone's favorite, mainly because it's written like in an epistolary format, like kind of sort of letters and journal entries. And the beginning is awesome when he's traveling to Count Dracula's castle, and the way it's described. Actually, the first part of the book is awesome, and then it does change, and it becomes something completely different that appeals to some people. I really enjoyed it. It's like this action adventure sort of thing. This adventure in London with these characters. Very different to the movie. Very different to the movie, even though I quite enjoyed the movie. I don't know if you've seen the movie with what's his name? My wife's right here, so I'm asking her. She loves this guy. Gary Oldman. Yeah, she's in love with this guy. She doesn't want I mean, I actually really enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun. But Gary Oldman plays Dracula. Have you not seen that?
No, I've not
Have
seen
you
the
not?
Gary Oldman one. No, no.
No, no. It's actually very good. And then you got Anthony Hopkins who plays
Yeah.
this professor, whatever. I don't know. It's hysterical. But it's actually in many ways, purists will say they hate it, but actually, it's big budget and all that, but it actually stays true a lot to the story and the spirit of the story.
Okay.
But I think you'll enjoy it. You should give it a go.
Yeah, I will do. I'll read the book over the next couple of months, and then I'll definitely watch the movie.
Yeah. So Katsu's Dracula is a favorite of mine. I love the Gary Oldman movie, and he is an amazing actor. And if I wasn't with my wife, I'd be very worried. She loves Gary Oldman. he's a bit of a She likes interesting faces. That's why she likes him. Not traditionally handsome, just interesting. So what did you say? Yeah, great test. And then Gareth says Gary Oldman played Dracula. Sid Vicious, I remember that, and Beethoven. It's just in just a few years. Yeah, he's multi-talented.
He's got big range. Yeah.
And my favorite movie with him in is Leon, the Professional.
Oh, yes.
And he plays that baddie. And he comes in and he's listening to like Beethoven or something. I think my wife will have to remind me of the rest of the scene, but it's absolutely, he's terrifying in that movie. He's one of the worst villains ever in that movie.
That is a fantastic movie, Leon. I do love that movie.
Yeah. Who was it? Anthony Hopkins or Oldman who played Winston Churchill in Churchill? Was it Hopkins? No, who was it?
No.
I'm going crazy now.
Don't know. Hopefully someone will tell us in the comments.
Yeah, please. Churchill. What an incredible and the makeup and the way that he speaks and everything. I'm a bit obsessed with World War II, so I love that whole Churchill.
Okay.
Thing. Yeah. Winston Churchill. That was Gary Oldman. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Hey, Crystal. Gary Oldman is amazing. My favorite film with him is The Dark Knight. Yeah, he's very good in that. What is this? I love True Romance. Gary Oldman plays a pimp. Haven't seen that one. Actually, I think I've seen the movie, but I can't remember. He was brilliant as Beethoven in Immortal Beloved.
Okay.
So just looking at what I love him in The Fifth Element. With that hair, yeah. Have you seen The Fifth Element?
Yeah, I have seen The Fifth Element, yeah.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I love the movie except for one thing.
Okay.
Why did they have to have that one character, that flamboyant character on that starship, whatever? Remember that guy? Ruby something. And he's got this hair and he's got this. He just goes completely nuts. Why did they have to have him in this movie? He ruined the movie for me. He was so irritating. Do you remember? You know who I'm talking about?
I do know who you're talking about. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I don't know. I don't mind a bit of flamboyance.
No, he was more than but he was
more than that. Yeah.
He came waltzing in there, and I still enjoy the movie. He wasn't that bad. No, I'm just saying he was totally out of place. He came in there like didn't enjoy him. Sorry. Yeah, Gary Oldman. My wife had to remind me. Got that. Check. Plays Churchill. He did such Churchill. He won an Oscar for that. I think it was his first Oscar, if I'm correct.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, what else have we got here? Yeah, we got that. Because it's dark, Gary.
Yeah, wasn't where I was expecting this conversation to go.
Yeah. Maybe we should start talking about Megan Fox and see what my wife does. I won't have supper for the rest of the week. That was his first Oscar, I think. Yeah. Ruby Rod. Yeah, Ruby Rude. That's a guy in The Fifth Element.
Yes, yeah, Ruby Rod.
And he had this high pitched voice. Okay, you might think he's great, Crystal, but I'm sorry, but I couldn't stand him. He came in there with that high-pitched voice and screaming at people. He was a man, and I didn't like him. Yes, I believe so. Oh, no, that was because I mentioned Megan Fox. Okay, let's keep that on.
Dear.
No, I'm just thinking, any final comments about horror and stuff? Or I'm just
So I
trying to
think
think.
one of the things I was just
There's something I wanted to say, but it's gone off my head here. But go on, think first.
one of the things I was sort of, I suppose, really pondering is the, where we have like just the genre, how we define genres really. And I'm always curious about people's thoughts on, because we have like horror is bundled in with fantasy, sci-fi, and this speculative fiction
Yeah.
umbrella a lot. And I was doing a bit of research on various sort of awards, book awards, etc. And a lot of them some of them have a separate sci-fi fantasy, but some of them have a separate horror. But sometimes it's just all three of them competing for the best novel. It just seems very sort of mixed. And I was trying to sort of define for myself what makes a book a horror book rather than a fantasy book, i.e., with fantastical elements.
Okay. Now, one thing that happens often now, I think, with the publishing, I think it's a money making thing as well. It's the same thing with covers.
Yeah.
You're going to get a cover that is horror, but might as well be lumped in with thriller. It doesn't really matter. Speculative fiction. And if you go into a bookstore now where you can't differentiate, and Stephen King is thrown in with everything else, or if you've got a horror section, it's just Stephen King. Whereas I think back in the 70s and 80s, I think it was more clearly defined. This is horror. As to what actually defines horror, it's tricky to tell. It's supposed to be horror fiction or horror in general. It's supposed to terrify you, horrify you, or disgust you. Make you feel all those emotions. It's that kind of give you that kind of response. Where I suppose science fiction, you're looking at otherworldly. I don't know. I haven't really thought about this. I differentiate science fiction and fantasy. I think of fantasy as literature or as books or that could well be set on a world like ours, on a world with rules and so on, just like ours. It might be fantastical landscapes like Lord of the Rings, but if you think about it, there's nothing otherworldly about it. Whereas science fiction, it's set on another planet, or it's set in a world that's outside of the rules of our world, the laws of our world.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? I don't know. I haven't had time to think about that. But
I mean, I was sort of grappling with this recently, and I was thinking like, the horror element of the story sort of driving towards, the fear, creating fear or disgust was certainly the ones that sort of sprung to my mind. That's the driver of a horror book. And again, a complete sidetrack on that point, but that just made me think of, have you seen, again, completely different, the Disney Pixar Inside Out?
I absolutely love it. Yeah, I love it. I love it.
Because it's obviously got the five core emotions within that, joy, sadness, anger, and then joy, sadness, anger, and then it's got disgust and fear. And I was like, well, those two are definitely the horror elements of the brain. It's really, really interesting how they came up with those five being the core elements, core emotions of humanity. But so I was like, okay, fear and disgust, absolutely fine. So and I now trying to think, well, what's the difference between fantasy and sci-fi? And I've done a couple of videos on like my favorite sci-fi and my favorite fantasy. And the biggest struggle I've had is this fantasy or is this sci-fi? And like, I really struggle to tell the difference between the two. And I think there's some sort of quote about science fiction is making the improbable probable, and fantasy is making the impossible possible. And that's sort of the guide they sort of said, which is very loose. Again, it doesn't really help, but it's just a fascinating how they're sort of all lumped together in this speculative fiction and I just I I like genres because they help sort of guide you a little bit, but also I think they have their significant limits when you talk about books. And you talk about, we talk about sort of horror, talking about Stephen King. I've read obviously two Stephen Kings, so Pet Sematary and Misery, both
Yeah,
classed as horror, but this one's got a lot more fantastical elements in it.
yeah,
A lot more fantastical elements in it, and so it leans towards sort of the fantasy side of horror with all the sort of paranormal, or I would say that. And this one is very much not.
human.
This is just life, the horror
Yeah,
of life.
yeah.
And it's just fascinating how, like, you get the blends of different genres and how it all works together and what the driving force that the author's aiming to affect the reader.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you can look at any horror novel, and there's going to be elements of other stuff in it as well. You've got murder mystery, but as I said, I think if you even look up the definition of horror, it is to fear, it's to terrify, it makes you squirm, disgust. Yeah, those are the emotions that it elicits. That's what you actually feel when you read or you watch a horror movie, let's say, or you read a horror book. Now, if you think about, let's go back to movies for a second. Have you watched The Thing?
Yes.
Yeah. Now
Yeah,
that,
one of
that
my
is a
favorites. Yeah.
very definite science fiction horror, right?
Yep.
It has very clear elements of both. If you take away all the science fiction elements, it is a terrifying movie. It's meant to make you squirm. There's a sense of paranoia. It scared the crap out of me, right? That's what a horror novel tries to do,
Yeah.
for the most part. It tries to scare you. Um, and so, yeah, I mean, there's elements of it in fantasy fiction as well. But yeah, so there's overlaps, but it's difficult to answer that question.
Mm.
I looked at speculative fiction and I see there's so many different people that say different things about it, and how to differentiate between the three. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
just
and
a
I
little
think
bit of,
with what I also find fascinating is sort of uh, the view of people outside of our genre readers who occasionally look down on the fantasy, horror, sci-fi genres
yeah,
for whatever reason, wrongly, in my opinion, obviously. But it's just also fascinating that they will, again looking at awards, but they will recognise sort of what they class as speculative fiction, which isn't fantasy or sci-fi or horror. And I talk, you look at people like Naomi Alderman, who wrote The Power, and she's just brought out a new one, which is The Future, I think, which is very much a sort of sci-fi speculative fiction, but they class it as speculative fiction, and it then suddenly starts winning awards. Um, and there's lots of things like that where it's more. Um, Margaret Atwood is a prime example, who writes. I mean, she'll say that she writes speculative fiction. She doesn't write sci-fi or fantasy, but her books would easily fall within the sci-fi fantasy genre. But because they're badged as speculative fiction, they are given more kudos by certain elements of the reading community.
yeah. You think about movies in the same way. What kind of movies win Oscars?
Yeah,
You have to kind of do a little bit of ass kissing in order to. I don't know if you do anything they don't like, you know. But look at someone like Quentin Tarantino.
mm,
He doesn't cater to anyone. He's not going to win an Oscar for anything. And even Gary Oldman, it took him a long, long, long time to win that Oscar. And he's played in incredible movies. And it's maybe because he doesn't fit the mold of an Oscar kind of candidate. So it's the same in books. It's that kind of thinking. I think it's kind of a snobbish way of thinking. It must have literary merits. It has to have certain merits in order for it to. Yeah,
yeah, but this is I mean, yeah, exactly, the literary merit. This gets into the discussion of um, the conversation about what is art and what is good art,
yeah,
and therefore what is good literature and what is bad literature. And I think the looking down of something because it falls into a certain genre is preposterous, because some of the greatest books ever written are horror, fantasy, sci-fi. You go back to the classics. You look at all the classics. Frankenstein, Picture of Dorian Gray, Dracula, War of the Worlds. The list goes on, and they all fall into sci-fi, fantasy, horror
No,
genres. I would
absolutely.
say, but yet we don't. They're not perceived with the same gravitas as contemporary fiction seems to be on occasion.
Which is kind of ridiculous. And if you think about it, actually, if you think about Ollie's Garb August, he celebrates reading trashy fiction because it's not all bad. It's not very good. Some of it's excellent. So it's the same kind of idea there. And I think that's probably why I came up with it. We celebrate reading something that's just pulpy or trashy, and it's so bad and so good. Okay, look at some of these comments. It says, Matt, if you enjoy Stephen King, I might suggest checking out his son, Joe Hill. I forgot about that. Joe Hill is fantastic. I've enjoyed his short stories. Also, I love Heart-Shaped Box and Lost Right. Okay, and then earlier on, Gareth said he came to fame over here in a prison drama called Meantime. I haven't seen that, but apparently my wife has. It's quite obsessing, but brilliant. Okay, so what else we got here? Joe Hill is fantastic. Yes. Gareth says it's all blurred now. It used to be horror. If it was supernatural and thriller, if it was more reality-based horror. Actually, you're so right. I mean, I even heard. I've just been talking Watchers, Dean Koontz. A lot of his work is called thriller, even though he's supposed to be a horror writer, because back in the 80s, 90s, there was no supernatural elements. It's a thriller. Gareth is so right there, and it's very blurred now. But I still think the main difference between horror and anything else is the whole point is to terrify the hell out of you, disgust you, or Then again, if you think of a thriller, it's also, well, I suppose being thrilling is different to being terrifying. Probably got blurred because serial killer books were so extreme in the last 40 years. Any comments? Oh, there's a whole lot of other comments here.
Okay.
Often great books are a blend of genres. Absolutely true.
Yeah.
And Farah. Hi, Farah. Hey. That says, I love the Douglas Adams book behind you. The book behind you. Where's that?
Yeah, big. Yeah, should be that?
There we go. Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
No, yeah.
No, what is that? Douglas Adams.
Yeah, it's must have been is the full selection. Yeah. Douglas Adams, Terry Pratchett, definitely on my favorite authors. I know you're a Douglas Adams fan as well with the Hitchhiker's Guide.
Yeah, that's going to be high up on my top 100 list. That's going to be. You have to wait a while to see that.
Yeah, it's so good. Just his humor and his sort of, again, not overly optimistic view of the world and society within it.
Yeah, no, he's hilarious. I think some of them are better than others are. The first two, the first one is brilliant. The second one is brilliant. But I gave them all 5 stars because it's just classic. But the third one goes a little bit flat with me. I don't know. It's like he's in his cave and. I
enjoyed them all. I think the first one just blew me away, just because it was so different from anything I'd read previously. I was just absolutely blown away by it, and I think the rest are similar, different stories, but very similar. If you enjoy the first one, you'll enjoy the rest. Maybe not quite as much, but you'll certainly still enjoy them because the humor is still brilliant. I just love his view, that sort of, I suppose, dark, depressing view of humanity and society, and sort of
the robot. Marvin the robot is perfect for that. Yeah.
Oh, he's fantastic.
A brain the size of a planet, but he's just so depressed the whole time.
Oh, he's amazing. Absolutely.
Yeah. You know what I can't understand is maybe I've been reading the wrong books. I've tried Terry Pratchett once or twice. Didn't work for me.
Okay.
Maybe
No?
I need to be pointed in the right direction and give him another try at one stage. Yeah, maybe not
Yeah.
now, but yeah,
No, I'll have a think. I mean, Terry Pratchett, Discworld is one of my favourites series of all
yeah,
time. But yeah, it's I mean, it's 41 books, novels in the series, plus a number of short stories and whatever else. So there's a lot, and they're all pretty much just standalones. But you have like connecting characters throughout the 41 books. They sort of work in roughly chronological order. But his humour, what I find the difference between the two, Douglas Adams is very much about the jokes and hitting the humour consistently,
yeah,
page after page after page. Terry Pratchett has the jokes, but there's more. I suppose he's making a point more within his stories, if that makes sense. The story
yeah.
is more important than the joke. And sometimes Douglas Adams, the joke is as important as the story, if not more important than the story.
Some of the stuff he does is just crazy. Yeah, but yeah, no, I'll definitely give him a try again. I'm not giving up on him completely, but I was because everyone compares it to you, right? They all talk
Yeah,
about them being such similar kinds of writers. And I've just never got his kind of humor. I've never got his kind
yeah.
of,
I think they have the similar sort of. There's similarities in the sense of humour, sort of that. I suppose it'd be classed that sort of classical British humour. Um, like Monty Python, sort of that
yeah.
sort of humour.
I
But
enjoy Monty Python as well, but we're not going to talk
yeah,
about that.
no. But there's a very different it's still quite a different style of writing and different style of story. I find Terry Pratchett, and
Yeah,
so the humour elements are similar, but I think the comparison is a little bit overmade of the two. I think they are quite different in their way they tell stories,
yeah,
books. So yeah, I can understand you get on more with one than the other. Definitely.
no, absolutely,
But
yeah.
yeah, you'll have to after this, you'll have to let me know which ones you've tried, and I'll give you a couple of suggestions.
No, I can actually tell you now off the
Okay.
top of my head. I tried Color of Magic. I can't remember the other one I tried.
Yeah.
Uh, I almost DNF'd it. I just thought, and maybe I was too young, or
No.
maybe
So
I didn't give him enough of
oh,
some suggestions. I think I've lost you. I've
I'm
lost
back. I
you.
think I'm back. I think I'm back, Cliff. Hopefully.
You're back. Yeah, yeah, yeah. You're back.
Yes. Yeah. Good.
Let's
Yeah.
just look at some of the
Lost you a second.
suggestions again. There's definitely plenty of book smart out there, but their life's too short.
Yeah.
Just read what you want to enjoy.
Yep.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Absolutely.
And there's going to be some people that look at my list of books and they're going to say, what the hell is that book doing on there? But it's your list. It's your life. It's your list, right?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Absolutely. Okay. I agree. Reading is meant to be fun. Farah. Okay. Here we got. Oh, wait. Pratchett and Adams are really different, I think. Okay. Different pace, rhythm to it. Maybe that's why I don't. But I'm willing to give him another shot. Just because
And
he's
just going
quite.
back, Color of Magic is probably. I know. I think it's the first book he wrote in the Discworld, but most people would suggest not starting with Color of Magic because it's not. It's very different to later books in structure and format and plot, and everything gets very different later on. And yeah, there are, I would suggest, better starting points depending on what you're looking for. But yeah, Color of Magic is not necessarily the strongest.
Yeah. So after the video is finished, we'll hang around for a while. I'm going to write down some recommendations.
Yeah. I've got my pile of. There's some Pratchett there, and there's some more down there. So I will start showing you some. I think you might want to give a shot. But yeah, Color of Magic is. Yeah, it got very different. And it's interesting because we won't talk too much about this, but how he sort of changed and how Death became more of a character, and his
Yeah.
relationship with Neil Gaiman and actually creating and continuing with Discord.
And I love Neil Gaiman. I absolutely love Neil Gaiman. So I don't know how similar the two are. No, they're not similar. But the funny thing is, I tried reading that they did a series together. They did a book together.
Yep.
And I didn't enjoy it. What's it? Something God.
Good Omens. Yeah. So they have like as a partnership. They they got on together really, really well. Like they did. Obviously, Terry Pratchett's died, but they have a similar. I think they have the way their brains work is similar, which is why I think they connected in real life and became very close friends. I think their writing is different, but it has similarities. But again, I think they are quite different in their approach. I just think in real life they have very similar, the way their brains work and the sort of stupid ideas they were able to come up with sort of matched each other.
Yeah,
and played off each other quite well.
Yeah, because I adore Neil Gaiman. A lot of these books are right up there for me. So yeah, and very British writers. Okay, what's it? Pratchett's and what is that? Oh, sorry, Pratchett and Adams are really different. Humor at a different pace. I want to do a video on humor. Yeah, you must, Gareth. Yeah.
That would be great. Yeah.
I like the fact that Gareth's videos are sometimes so unique and original and different. You know, and tackles different kinds of topics, discussion topics. Okay, I enjoy it both. I always find the human difference. It's going through. Also, what? Oh, okay. Yeah. Maybe try Reaper Man. It features death as a character. Have you heard of Reaper Man?
Oh yeah, I've read Reaper Man. Yeah, I think the death. I think I'm on the same wavelength as you, Alicia. I think maybe there's some of the death series might suit you, Cliff. There's a few. Yeah, Reaper Man's a good one.
I've got my notepad right here. I'm going to write down after we finished. Okay. And there we go.
And there's one before, so Reaper Man, I think, is the second death. Oh, there you go. More, I think, was the first death novel, and Reaper Man, I think, was the second. Pretty sure was the second one.
Is more one of the ones you're going to recommend to me? Because it's one that I have heard of.
Yeah, More is good as well. I think More starts. It's the fourth Discworld novel he wrote, and it's probably the strongest of the first four by far. It's like a real step up from the first three. But yeah, so it would be a good recommendation for you, I think.
Yeah. No, I think you're gonna have to give me some recommendations.
I'll give you a few, because it doesn't really matter where you start. But I'll give you a few, and then you can take it away and see what you think.
Yeah, Neil Gaiman is fantastic. I recently read Odd and the Frost Giants, or Folklore February, and loved it. If I can find it, I'll buy it. Finding things here in the southern tip of Africa is not always easy. I want to do a Neil Gaiman video at some stage soon, show my collection and talk about him a bit. Because he's a fantastic author.
So what are your favorite Gaiman novels? Neverwhere, yeah.
Neverwhere, The Graveyard Book. I like his YA as well, eh? Graveyard Book, Coraline, Neverwhere. I enjoy American Gods. I enjoyed The Ocean at the End of the Lane.
Yeah.
Off the top of my head, I can't think of other ones, but everything I've read by him, I've really enjoyed. But Neverwhere for me was just something special, under London, kind of this other world.
Yeah.
Oh, my friend, that was really awesome, eh? Really enjoyed that. That was fantastic. You're gonna have to do live more.
Wonderful.
You're a natural, man.
Well, at least, I don't get the opportunity to edit this one, do I? So that's always a concern.
No, but you actually don't need to edit. That whole conversation that was actually earlier on in the week about editing and not editing. You're a natural. You should get up there and just talk about it. But yeah, it was a pleasure having you on my show. It's phenomenal. I love your channel, and let's move from strength to strength again.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's been a real pleasure talking to you, Cliff, and meeting you in person. And thank you for thank you, Alicia. That's very kind.
You got a new subscriber? There you go.
So hopefully we'll speak again very soon, Cliff. It'd be great. Thank you.
Yeah, that would be awesome. Yeah. Thanks. And thanks everyone. Take care. Chat to you later. Okay, we're gonna leave in 3, 2, 1.